saying that, and we'll get Peter Hitchens' view on him in a second. Peter, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Did you ever have any run-ins with young Mr. Prescott?
No, far from it. The only time I met him was we were in the green room for a BBC Question Time programme, and in fact I complimented him on an article he'd written in the Guardian about a historian called Ralph Samuel, who he'd been taught by at Ruskin College. And it's amazing the way he beamed and preened over this, because I think he did get very tired of being mocked as stupid. Yeah. Which he absolutely wasn't. He was an extremely well-educated person, and you didn't get in those days into Ruskin College if you were stupid. I don't think you do now either. But he certainly was a very bright man, also a man of the extremely hard left, which people have never really understood. And that component of what New Labour really was, a 1960s Oxford-educated, a very near Marxist, is the thing which John Prescott was, like many of the other members of the New Labour cabinet, as a 60s revolutionary. And there were many things about him which were likable or enjoyable, but that's the thing most people should remember about him, that he was a member of an extremely hard left government, which did an enormous amount of damage to the country. However funny he may have been, however much we may have enjoyed him punching voters, that's what he was.
Indeed, and funnily enough, I was mentioning you just the other day because we were talking about the whole Blair project and how we're now sort of living it, as it were, because the entire establishment, as you've said, has been kind of reformed in his image, and so now the establishment is no longer conservative with a small c. It's very much a sort of left-wing, academia is left-wing, the civil service is left-wing, almost every single...
All the charities are left-wing.
Yeah, I mean...
everything is, yeah.
You have to, somebody once said to me a couple of months ago, if you wanted to be a punk rocker now, you'd have to be a right-winger as opposed to being a sort of anarchist, because we're now the new anarchists.
Well, it may be, but the trouble is most people don't understand what's going on, so the response to it tends to be for people to be even more left-wing than the government they're supposedly protesting against. But yeah, it's the thing to realise about John Prescott is that he didn't actually speak for what you might call old-fashioned working-class Christian conservative Labour, of which there used to be an awful lot and there is now virtually none. He spoke very much for the trade union left, and that's what he was there for. And because he came undoubtedly from a working-class background, had been to secondary modern school and worked hard in a tough job, that obviously made him and his politics appear more acceptable to those Labour voters who were mistrustful, as they actually rightly were, of exactly what Blair was on about. Unfortunately, they never cottoned on. Hardly anybody is, to this day, has probably cottoned on to what Blair, or rather Alistair Campbell and Gordon Brown were up to. So that's all too late now.
Yes, well, they were rather better at disguising it than Keir Starmer in the new Labour lot.
Well, they just don't really feel they need to try. An awful lot of the spade work was done for them years ago, so that they don't face the levels of opposition or suspicion, or indeed they don't face anything remotely resembling a conservative establishment anymore. So they don't need to be as smart or as cunning as the 1997 law did, and as you can see, they're not as smart or as cunning.
No, they certainly aren't. I was reading your piece in the paper this morning with interest. Am I the last person to crave the peace of those lost Sundays when the shops were all closed and there was nothing on TV? I mean, the only argument I'd have with you is there's still nothing on TV. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago, but it seems in some other ways like a different age, doesn't it?
It was, but it collapsed very quickly. In fact, Margaret Thatcher, that well-known radical, was one of the people who tried very hard to get rid of it and was defeated on her first attempt, and then later got it through. But no, the transformation of the country from then to now has been colossal. But as with so many of these things, once you break a taboo, even if it's lasted 1,000 years, it's gone and irreplaceable. Yeah. It's very, very hard to bring it back. And so even the poor people of Lewis, I think, 30 years ago, I would imagine there's probably still a majority of people in Stornoway and the Isle of Lewis still saying, actually, we'd rather keep the old Scottish Sabbath. But that's been ground down by 30 years of pressure from the outside world. So now when Tesco just says, oh, actually, we're going to start opening on Sundays, whether you like it or not, some people will oppose it, but most people will go shopping in Tesco's. And that's it. It's over. And anybody who tries to go back to the previous arrangement, can whistle for it.
Well, the thing that I noticed more on a Sunday is everybody goes to the garden centre for whatever
Well, that is
reason.
that's the new one of the several new British religions, the National Health Service, the garden centre. Yes, absolutely, it's a huge thing, but it doesn't really fill the gap. And the point about Sunday is it was a day off for everybody, and therefore it was a family-friendly day off. Now people scatter their time off across the week, and they're sometimes around when the other members of their families are, and sometimes not. And it's not. In fact, it's the Western capitalist world has achieved what Stalin failed to do in the Soviet Union. He tried to abolish Sunday, and it was so unpopular that he had to bring it back.
But we've now got a situation where people work in very different ways. I mean, we were talking this morning about sleeplessness. There's a piece in the Mail today about how Britain is a very tired country because people don't get enough sleep. But it's partly because they're working strange hours, or they're sometimes not working at all, or they're sometimes working from home, or sometimes they're getting on a train. You know, there's a sort of very different form of society now, isn't there?
Well, yes, but the whole electronic revolution has meant that work has spread into everybody's evening and late night, and indeed early morning. If you can work, you often will, but
Right.
people don't feel particularly secure in their jobs, and therefore they will do this. And some people just enjoy it. It's very distracting, and also the long distance commuting, which has been imposed by deindustrialization, where people have to travel sometimes 40, 50 miles a day. Just to go to work, eats again into family life and private time, and the fact that these days you cannot live on one income, so both parents have to go out to work. Again, everybody is distracted, tired, trying to do more than they've got time or energy for, and it's astounding that people put up with it, but they do, because the alternative is generally poverty. But it isn't really as fantastically nice and advanced as we're led to believe it is. There were things about the world 50 or 60 years ago which were preferable to the world we live in now.
Yeah, absolutely right. And there's an awful lot of things that don't work at the moment as well. I don't want to get into all of that, but let me finish up with the COVID inquiry, because a subject close to both of our hearts, no doubt. It's going to be the most expensive inquiry in history. £208 million is the latest projected cost of it. I don't really understand what it's for.
Well, it will be there, I think, to validate the grave mistake the government made. I confidently expect it to conclude that we did not shut the country down hard enough or long enough or do ourselves enough damage while we did it. That's the idea that it was all a terrible mistake will remain known to any intelligent person who studies it. We are paying for it now.
Yeah.
The imposition of inheritance tax on farmers is part of the huge payment, the approaching enormous increases in council tax are part of the huge payment for the ridiculous expenditure which Rishi Sunak launched on the country without any money to pay for it at the time of the Great Panic. That's where we are. And now we see, of course, just as we madly authorized the use of British long-range weapons on Russian territory, we cut our actual national defenses by 500 million quid.
Practically on the same day.
Pay for the COVID panic. This is all quite extraordinary. You look at this country, you're like, who actually is governing? Do they ever think about anything? Do they have any idea what they're doing? Do they understand even what they have done? And certainly, do they understand what they're doing? I'm astounded by this business of giving Ukraine permission to use long-range missiles, not necessarily because of the effect that it has, or because I'm convinced it will lead to nuclear war. Because I have to be very cautious here, because I've said that Putin would be mad to invade Ukraine. I still think he was mad to invade Ukraine, and I'm not going to say anything about whether or not he might use nuclear weapons, because how can we tell? But what is the really totally significant development in this, I certainly with the Americans, and I think with our missiles as well, these cannot be used without the involvement of our service personnel.
Right.
That is to say, what's happening is that weapons from the United States and from Britain, under the control of British and American servicemen who answer to the British and American governments, are firing weapons into Russian sovereign territory. Now, we aren't at war with Russia, as far as I know. No declaration of war has been made.
No.
Ukraine's at war with Russia, but this is an extraordinarily risky step, whichever way you look at it. And I was fascinated by the response of the American government to what they had themselves done, which was to order all their embassy staff in Kiev to go home and to close the embassy. Right. What do they think might happen? It's not very hard to work out how their minds went through it and what they thought might be the limits of a Russian response. And looking at events both in Ukraine and the Middle East, you can see why it crossed their mind that their embassy in Kiev might no longer be safe. So I think that we are in the most extraordinary, dangerous minefield here. And so, talking of minefields, by the way, where is Princess Diana when you need her?
I mean,
and
apparently
the whole of the world was totally against landmines. Yeah. Except, as it happened to me, I said they were.
Well, Britain has signed up to the UN Convention, you know, but nobody in the British government is willing to criticise America for giving landmines, which we apparently oppose, to Ukraine, who are also not signed up to it.
But it was such a universal opinion. The same with cluster munitions, which are also permitted to be used by the Ukrainians. On this matter, we totally take leave of our senses. We don't look at anything we ever said before, any principles we pretend to have had. And here we are saying, well, we must carry on helping Ukraine. Well, before all this started, Ukraine was a sovereign country, a functioning democracy, reasonably prosperous and happy, at peace with its neighbors. And then we started helping Ukraine. And since then, it's become a battlefield, a graveyard, and a sea of destruction, constantly under bombardment from Russia, losing its young men. If that's what happens when we help you, then if I were Ukrainian, I might say, let's not have any more help.
Absolutely right.